Okay, everybody, it is the 4th of June, and I hope you're all doing well. This lecture is going to cover some of the PowerPoint slides that are provided with the book, and I'll click through and show you how to get to them. Hopefully I don't run out of breath. I think I'm doing okay, but anyhow, the Dow was down 70 points. It opened up, and now it's down. The jobs numbers were poor. If you're into macroeconomic details on what's going on in the overall economy, you know, in the Austrian school, we don't see any difference between micro and macroeconomics. It's just economics. Of course, we approach it as a praxeological study, not an econometric study. That's one of the basic differences between the schools, and some of the schools that exist are in between those two schools of thought. Once again, good. It's good to take a look at different books. This is the Keynes's book, The General Theory of Unemployment, Interest, and Money. That's the one you must read if you believe you're a Keynesian, as many of you do, obviously from your posts. There's a number of people who think in that regard. A book I enjoyed reading, I'm a big fan of Henry Hazlitt's. He wrote a book called Economics in One Lesson. If you really want to know most of the way I think and approach economics, this book's the one. Look at it's short, and it's written very well, and it's easy to understand. There's plenty of acknowledgments in the back. It's only 200 pages. This book is another one that Henry wrote that I really liked, and it's written quite some time ago, but it's sort of a foil to Keynes's book. My point to that is read good books. If you're interested in a subject like this, you should be reading, not just the newspaper. So anyhow, gratefully things seem to be calming down in the cities with this rioting, but we'll see. We will see. Anyhow, here we are, week 2. You can see my discussion is up. It's one on the supply and demand of what many consider public good, which is policing. I disagree. I think that there's a supply and demand for everything, and this is just a commodity like any other. And I put up, particularly, I want you to listen to John Haidt. He's very interesting as a precursor to a discussion. I bring these scholars up because I think they have something to say. Here's Murray on chapter 3. He's great on supply and demand, and we'll go over some of that shortly. So listen, you can go in files right here on the left. There's files, and again, here's where I have the PowerPoint slides, all of them, and I uploaded them from this edition. Here's chapter 1. You can download it. I prefer to download it so that I can. I think I can draw on it on this. I'm not sure. One of the if this continues, I'm going to end up buying myself a smart board so that I can do lectures from here. But they're a little pricey, from what I hear. You can look at the PowerPoints either way, either through Microsoft program. I don't know if you're aware, if you're an Apple user, you have access to all of Microsoft's products with your student ID. And let me show you where to get to that before I start lecturing. Let me just give you an idea where that is. If you do coloradomountain.edu and you go into, I think it's the Basecamp website. So here's Basecamp up here. Click on that, and it'll ask for your credentials. I'm already logged in through Google, so it just takes me straight to Basecamp. And you see where this hamburger is over here, whatever you want to call it. This is the app launcher. Come on, I'm slow today. I hope it doesn't drop. So you click over here, and all of Microsoft's products are over here, and they're free for your use. We're licensed here at the college, so you glom onto that license. So if you do need that, go ahead and use it. Use the resources that we have here at the college. All right, I'm going to go through first principles quite quickly, and so hang in there with me. You've already done this work, but I want to nail down some of these concepts so that you have them. I don't know if I like that there. I want it over on the other screen. It's covering up my big screen. So maybe I'll just do it from here. Well, all right. I should have gotten used to this before I started, but that's okay. Here we are with first principles, and make me a little smaller, you a little bigger. They don't put notes in these, which I find handy, but what's a principle? What the heck is a principle? A principle, not a P-A-L, a principle like your principal at school, P-L-E. A principle might be integrity is a principle. What principles guide choices? Which ones govern individual choices and how they interact? And economy-wide interactions. We're going to go through them here. If you've read, you've done that. Resource. Again, a lot of this is definitional, and you're learning a new language. So nothing helps more than repetition. It's not. You're in college now. You're at the 200 level. I'm very little interest in your learning style. However you learn it. Repetition works. Scarce. Limited supply, resources scarce when there's not enough of that resource available to satisfy all. Scarcity is real. True cost of something is opportunity cost, right? Zuckerberg dropped out of a pretty good college, for better or for worse. He did that, and it worked out for him. Marginal decisions are made at the margin of an activity about whether to do a bit more or a bit less. Should I have that 18th beer after 17? And marginal analysis is the study of these marginal decisions. Incentives, anything that offer rewards to people who change their behavior. And when you start thinking about incentives, especially those who are interested in politics, you have to be careful. Like in our discussion about what are the problems in communities that the poorer communities, and how we help the poor and what policies are good. We have to look at incentives and how those incentives play out in policies. People usually respond to incentives, exploiting opportunities to make themselves better off. As you can see, Krugman and Wells, clearly on the left, they admit this. This is true. We don't disagree on this. Which policy would more effectively reduce pollution? Educating manufacturers about climate change or offering them financial rewards? Now, right away, you can see in a Krugman book, they're going to say, oh, well, should we educate people about climate change? And this is a subject that 50% of the people in the country don't think that it's an issue that needs to be discussed, or the climate is changing and there's nothing we can do about it. The other 50% think there is something we can do about it. Reducing pollution, you're talking about CO2. CO2 is what plants eat. So, there's another side to that story. It's not just all one-sided. We can discuss some of that, but that's made its way into a textbook at a collegiate level. So this, what I would consider this is something along the lines of propaganda, because they act as if everyone agrees on this. Scientifically, they don't. They simply don't. You can disagree with me if you'd like, but I'm happy to debate anyone on that, including the head of the department of the sustainability department here at the college. Trade allows us to consume more than we otherwise could. There are gains from trade. Those of you who did the production possibility homework and stuff, we went through that homework yesterday, you can clearly see there's gains from trade. This is what Ricardo did a lot of his work on. It's better if China assembles cell phones and we do something else. Everybody gains. Markets move towards equilibrium. Yes, equilibrium, that's kind of a scientific term, and an economic situation which no individual would be better off doing something different. Specialization is a situation where each person specializes in a task. I'm not good at dunking basketballs, clearly at 5'9". So I specialize in teaching economics. Now, you can argue I'm no good at it, but here you are. Resources should be used efficiently to achieve society's goals. Economy is efficient. It takes all other opportunities to make people better off without making other people worse off. This is where we sort of part company in different schools, because I don't see the way that an Austrian looks at this is the market inefficiency that exists. There's no utopia, is better than the government inefficiency. So as friends of mine would say, government sucks at everything they do. You can argue that's not true. I could probably show you empirical evidence that everything that the government tries to do is less efficient. And as I move on in my studies, you look at areas like policing and you say, oh, well, the government has to do that. And it turns out when you investigate it a little more than just a cursory investigation, reveals that it's simply not true. There were private police to start with, and things went very well in that regard. And even despite the fact that there were inefficiencies. So equity, this is a condition where everybody gets their fair share. This is absurd, in my view. What is equity? Well, it's subjective. So who decides? Well, we'll have a committee and we'll decide who gets what and what is fair share. The book you want to read, if you're interested in, this was actually a law in Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, the fair share law. It's very central to the story. If you haven't read Ayn Rand and you're on the left, or you believe in socialism, you should read Ayn Rand and refute all of her arguments so that you have a very strong position in your socialist ideas. She is consider. That's one of those books that's been very, very widely read. So equity, deciding what is equality is completely subjective. So not measurable. So that's the trouble that governments get into. They're often at odds. Efficiency and equity are often at odds. John Haidt gives a lecture called Three Stories about alcoholism, about capitalism. And you should look that up on YouTube. Maybe I'll put it up for you because it's a great way. It's a great way of displaying different views on what is capitalism, what are free markets. So markets usually, Krugman and Wells will tell us, lead to efficiency. People normally take opportunities for mutual gain, right? This is the idea, like you go to a Starbucks and you hand them those greenbacks, those pieces of paper with dead presidents on them, and you get a coffee, and no one's surprised when you say thank you and they say thank you. This was if you listen to Rothbard, this was the value paradox, right? We each walk away with mutual gain. The value paradox before, and Adam Smith came up with the value paradox, and he had solved it, I don't know, in his lectures, but then in his book, The Wealth of Nations, he left it as a problem. The idea that diamonds were more valuable than water. How is that? It's the diamonds versus water paradox. How is that possible? Diamonds are a mere frippery or jewelry or whatever. How come they're more valuable? Well, we don't. That's the value paradox, and the idea of mutual gain is that I value the coffee more than you value the dollars, and you value the dollars more than I value the coffee. You see, so it's subjective, and that fits really well with the Austrian idea of human action, of people making their own choices, individualism, making their own choices given scarce resources. When markets don't achieve efficiency, government intervention can improve society's welfare. This is the argument. There's the argument, where we go, okay, well, let's government intervention in the form of the welfare state, has it improved society's welfare? Well, we've run that experiment since at least 1964. I would argue that it's been an abject failure. Others would argue that it's been a success. Sometimes markets fail and need correction. This is what we are really arguing about in the political sphere. Market failure. Some people see market failure everywhere. Others, like me, say no. Markets are a much better way to adjudicate the problems. In last week's discussion, when you say, oh, well, there's a market failure, if we don't make people stay at home, they won't stay at home. And I'm like, well, that may be true, but closing down the government, closing down the economy is, caused its own market failure. So the solution was worse than the cure was worse than the disease. And I think I can make a pretty effective argument in that regard. It's going to be debated for years to come. So if it's a theme for you, I'm always one of those people that'll tell students, listen, write about something and then write about it again and then write about it again. And in each time, do a little more research and see where the research takes you and see what I write to find out what I think. So very important to do that. So, if you tell me you wrote the same paper all 4 years of your college experience, I would be like, yeah, that's exactly right. And maybe it turns into a thesis in your doctorate or a doctoral dissertation. Maybe it turns into a book and we all read it. So, keep writing and thinking and studying. Economy-wide interactions. One person's spending is another person's income. Okay. During recessions, a drop in business spending leads to less income, less spending, and further drops in business spending, layoffs, and rising unemployment. This is where Krugman and Wells immediately, they're going to present you with the Keynesian idea. Less spending, further drops in business spending, layoffs, and rising unemployment. This is it's sort of an introduction to the business cycle. Overall spending sometimes gets out of line with the economy's productive capacity, right? People stop spending for various reasons. We're in that mode right now. Government policies can change spending. So what do? The U.S. government funded the Works Progress Administration, WPA, provided 8 million jobs between 35 and 43. Was this a good idea? Of course, I would argue no, that it's better to let the economy itself, free markets, figure that out. But certainly, the government policies absolutely change spending. If you lower interest rates, you will have more spending. You will have people borrowing more money. That's the point of lowering interest rates. When you set the price of money, people will use more of it. It's just like setting the price of Wonder Bread. If you set the price of bread, right, low, people will eat more bread. It's as simple as that. It's the same thing with money. If you set the price of money low, people will use more of it. Okay, now that's good for chapter 1, a bunch of definitional stuff. Let's get to chapter 2. And I'll close that one. And hopefully chapter 3, in this little lecture, I'm only 22 minutes in. That's good. This will come up. It's SLOW. There it is. Trade-offs and trade. This is production possibilities and how we gain from trade. Again, I'm going to go through it quickly because I think everybody got it. But these are the concepts that, these first 4 chapters are important because they're the concepts you need to continue on with this education. And it's, the foundation of everything. Models, scary. Sounds like, I wish I had a model that would trade stocks, perfectly, because, oftentimes when I critique climate change modeling, I'll use the analogy of if there was a model that I could have created. I love math, and I love teaching financial models. If there was a model that could predict what the climate was going to be in 100 years, don't you think Goldman Sachs or some other Wall Street firm would have a model that would predict equity prices next week? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. There's some of the smartest people in the world are down on Wall Street trying to make money. They would have that model. So if you're telling me that some scientists in East Anglia or wherever, a university, have a model that's going to come up with the temperature of the planet 100 years from now, I'm deeply suspicious, and I've studied it very carefully, and these models don't work. However, models are useful. Why are they so important? How do 3 simple models, production possibility frontier, comparative advantage, and circular flow diagram, help us understand modern economies? I would say they help a little, but don't do much. Why is an understanding of the difference between positive economics and normative economics important? And why do we disagree? Because I think I've covered that pretty well. We disagree because of the constrained and the unconstrained vision. That's the way Tom Sowell puts it. I think that's a great framework. For me, it works. It's a good model, if you will. You can come up with your own model. Has to do with personality traits. If you're not a psych major, you should at least take psychology in order to understand the difference. I use the 5-trait model. That's the one that seems to, fit the bill for me. There's a number of personality trait models out there. Pick one, use it. It'll help you with hiring for sure. It'll help you find out who you are. Know thyself. And the only way to change is by knowing who you are now. This movement that was amiss for the last, I don't know how many years, that you're okay the way you are. That's a really bad idea when you think about it for more than a second. I mean, you're okay the way you are today, but the future me should be better, I hope. Anyway, simplified representation of a real situation. That's what a model does. So models in economics make assumptions. And one of the assumptions is all things equal. All other relevant factors remain unchanged. So all things equal means if interest rates never change. No, we know that that's crap. We try to treat economics as close to a laboratory science as possible, with only one variable allowed to change at a time. That's the idea. Later on, you get into regression analysis and some calculus and things like that. But PPF diagram that shows the combination of two goods, very simple, but very effective. How much can we produce? What will it cost us to change our mix of production? And does it make sense to import goods from somewhere else? The answer to all three of those is resounding. Or the last one is a resounding yes. This is what Ricardo came up with. Here's Dreamliners versus small jets, and this could be Boeing or whoever. So the opportunity cost is now explained mathematically. What must be given up in order to get a good? Now, as an Austrian, I would say, no, well, this is largely subjective, but we can use this model, and it is useful, especially from a business sense. If you're an accounting major and you're trying to figure out the opportunity cost of making mac and cheese compared to making yogurt, if you work for Procter and Gamble or something, you might be doing this. So anyway, Boeing decides to change its production from point A to point B. Here's point A, here's point B, right? If they go from point A to point B, it'll produce 8 more small jets, 6 fewer Dreamliners. So 6/8, we make a ratio, it turns into a fraction. You can decimalize it or make it a percentage. Being able to drift between units is important in any field, but in this one, any field that uses statistics, but this one especially. So you can see how that works. All right, this out here is not feasible. This in here is inefficient. Suppose you're stranded on an island. Here we are back to Robinson Crusoe or Castaway. Luckily, this island's rich in clams and mangoes. These are great examples. If you devote all your time to harvesting clams, you get 100 clams a week. If you use all your time, if anybody been clamming, you can get quite a few. If you use all your time to collect mangoes, 200 mangoes a week. Assume it's possible to collect fractional amounts of both X and Y, and let's put them on a, you can graph this. And we might have done that in class if we were in class. And here's practice question 2. Drawing happy faces and drawing elephants. Take turns drawing each for each section. You make a production possibility. So one's easier than the other, clearly. So increasing opportunity costs, right? So the thing, it ends up that it's not linear, it's really a curve. And you can see by this illustration that opportunity costs increase in different areas on the curve, right? But again, we're trying to get economics to ape or steal from hard sciences like mathematics, and often this is just not true. It doesn't exist. Although, if you can use these calculations in business, and that's why we show them to you. So quantity of Dreamliners, why did it go back? The original production possibility frontier moved. Why did it do that? Well, maybe there was a new technology involved that made it easier to make these both of these jets, right? Increase in factors of production, resources used to produce goods and service. Why is there economic growth, right? Maybe we found more iron ore, and it got cheaper, better technology. This is what I meant by the Dreamliner thing. We get better at building stuff, and we get better really fast. It's where you see these productivity figures in economic announcements every week. Factors of production, right? Land. Land includes natural resources such as mineral deposits, oil, natural gas, water, and the actual acreage, space. Not space like out in outer space, but space like how much area do I have when it comes to land. Labor, physical and mental abilities of the workforce. Now, those of you who have read any Marx, as I have, labor sort of got a different connotation after Marx and Engels wrote their Das Kapital and their other writings, the Communist Manifesto. Labor became something else. But for our use, labor is that, right? The president of Ford Motor Company is labor. He's mental and physical abilities of the workforce. No different than, it's not the rank and file of the bourgeois is not labor. Well, they are labor for our use, for economic use. Physical capital is manufactured items used to produce other goods and services. If you listen to Murray Rothbard, talk about the ham sandwich and all of the physical capital that goes into it. There's a very famous talk about a pencil. If I have a chance, I'll put up Prax Girl and introduce you to praxeology. But the pencil is an amazing thing because it's the beauty of capitalism that a pencil exists, because you have to have rubber from rubber plantations in Burma and tin for the eraser holder that comes from God knows where. I don't know where they mine tin, but here in the States, I'm sure. On and on. Somebody has to cut the wood for the pencil itself. So there's a chainsaw, and somebody's got to build the chainsaw and make the chain for the chainsaw, and we've got to drill oil and make the gasoline and the oil mixture for a 2-cycle chainsaw. It's just endless. It's endless, the cooperation that's necessary, which brings me back to the socialist problem of calculation. The point that capitalists make or laissez-faire free market people make is that you can't possibly do all the calculations to make a pencil come together out of 30 years. There's no board or Politburo or a central manufacturing office in the United States that figures out how to make all that happen. It just happens through the interaction of people who are self-interested. So, physical capital, manufactured items used to produce other goods and services. This is some kind of robot arm. Oh, it's making, these are brake calipers down here. If you know anything about cars, you can see that it's probably, I don't know, maybe it's surfacing these brake calipers to get them ready for putting on a truck or a car. Human capital is the educational achievements and the skills of the labor force. How smart is your human capital? I often, when I show this slide, the first thing I think of is I have a number of really, I learned Spanish so that I could get the jokes. And I have a number of Mexican friends who are in the shadows, and I mean, they're illegal. And what happens is their human capital is undervalued. So you end up working with guys. I got one friend in particular who he has an engineering degree from Mexico, and he's working a maintenance job somewhere. And this dude can fix anything. He just looks at things and he knows how they work. You know, one of those really high IQs like that who he gets it. I've done a lot of fun stuff together, but whenever I have another guy and he has to work with him, I said, listen, you want to pay real attention to what Aldo does, because he knows exactly how to manage things and work on things. But that's a waste of human capital, right? So what has a bad immigration policy created? Well, it's created a deadweight loss in human capital. So you lose productivity when, for example, when I worked at the Roaring Fork Club and we had a bunch of guys who were brighter or they're underemployed. They're mowing greens when they should be teaching or doing something else. So comparative advantage makes sense to produce things you're especially good at producing. What is that? I can produce economics lectures, for better or for worse. I have a comparative advantage in economics lecturing over someone who's maybe never taken economics. So here's how gains from trade works, and these are in the problems that maybe tripped you up a little bit. Here's what we will consume without trade, and it's along our production possibility curve. Here's what Brazil produces without trade, along their same production possibility curve of large jets and small jets. Well, what happens? Here's how it looks. In a comparative advantage creates gains. Since each country has a different opportunity cost, it makes sense to specialize on trade. Now, they make it mathematical, but it's pretty obvious logically who's better at what. If you just look around the world, I don't know why Germany was almost the sole maker of pianos for many, Steinway. Now, of course, there's Yamaha and some other piano makers, but they had the comparative advantage in building musical instruments for some reason. And it can have to do with geography. It can have to do with natural resource availability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There, again, that calculation problem, there are way too many variables for anyone to understand why things are produced here and why some things are produced there, and all of those types of things. Country is a comparative advantage if its opportunity cost is lower than in other countries. Individual has comparative advantage if its opportunity cost of producing a good or service is lower than for other people. So, and you can see this play out. It's very logical. Now here's how they gain from trade. Did I do that? Yes. Here's how they gain from trade. Through specialization in trade, both countries produce more and consume more if they were self-sufficient. And here's how it looks. Look at here. This is how it ends up. And again, Ricardo did a lot of work on this. This course is where trade is, if you want to look up Paul Krugman's work, his Nobel Prize winning work was done in trade. Again, he and I disagree, but nonetheless, that doesn't make him dumb. So don't confuse absolute with comparative advantage. Just because the United States can produce more of both goods doesn't mean we're better off without trade. Okay, now this is the nuanced part. Pay attention to opportunity costs. It's cheaper for Brazil to produce small jets than it is for the US. So we will want to import these small jets from Brazil and stick to, shoemakers, stick to thy last, right? It's an old adage, but it's true. Texia and Urbania, little question, right? Which one is it? I can't remember. I don't know. You can figure it out. If you put it on, if you switch this to the slideshow, it'll tell you which one's right. I just don't want to, I don't feel like doing it. Let's see. There it is. And you click on it. Yep, there, A is correct. But that covers up my other screen, so it bums me out because I can't see me being me or something. I need 3 screens. I need more. This is another question, and you can go through these on your own. Countries specialize according to their own comparative advantage and trades with others. I can go through these. Texia is correct. Oh, it does. It gives you the answers. Urbania. And this one, of course, is it can consume a higher level than the domestic production. Correct. Very good. Sit with a partner. What would the U.S. economy be better off if we did not import so much clothing from China? Well, yeah. I love to give a long talk. I can do 2 hours on, the morality of allowing China into the World Trade Organization. This was a big decision. We knew, we still know. If you're not aware of this, China routinely murders its own people. I think this is a result of an ideology that's very sick. You can argue with me if you want, but I entreat you to read the Gulag Archipelago, and if you think that Solzhenitsyn is lying about everything that happened in the Soviet Union, go ahead, but I disagree. I don't think he had any reason to lie about the horrors of a socialist country. List the groups who you think would gain and the groups who would lose if Chinese clothing imports were restricted. Well, obviously, I think part of the good we're trying to do by trading with China is to bring enough Chinese out of poverty so that they will rise up and get rid of a totalitarian regime. That communism, I don't know what they're trying to do. They're trying to bring on the communist revolution 350 years from now, but it's not working and people are dying. So we thought that maybe if we injected some capitalism into or enticed them into some capitalism, that maybe that would raise all ships, and it certainly has. But there's been a cost, and the cost on the right wing, people would say, well, the cost is jobs in America, and they've got a point. So this is where isolationism, and we have a term for it in economics called autarky, where you produce everything in your own country. Well, this is the tariff game, and there's a lot of people that buy into that. I think that world trade is better, but this here is a dissertation, at least. Books and There's no great answer here. We can debate it for hours. It'd be fun to do it in class. Maybe I'll make it into a discussion question if you're really excited about it. Here's another problem. Boom. Brazil has comparative advantage in producing tomatoes. Now, trade takes the form of barter when people directly exchange goods or services that they have for goods or services that they want. But of course, barter, everybody, a lot of people say, oh, we should go back to barter and forget about these dollars and fiat money, and inflation is awful and all the problems with it. But barter assumes what we call in economics the double coincidence of wants. That's a $10 term for I want a cow and Susie's got a cow to sell me or trade with me, and she wants a pig and I have a pig. So we're able to trade, and they barter for the same value, one pig for one cow, or two pigs for one cow. But we've got a problem if I say, well, I want 1.5 pigs for one cow. And she said, wow, what are we going to do? We're going to hack a pig in half. That's a bad idea because it makes the other half worthless. So the double coincidence of wants is the problem with barter. So we talk about the circular flow diagram. Represents transaction and economy by flows around a circle. A household is a person or group of people that share their income. A firm is an organization that produces goods and services for sale. Just some more vocab for you. This is what the circular flow diagram looks like. I said in my lecture yesterday, I'm not a buyer. This is far too simple. But anyway, there goes money, 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 goods and services, factors, factors. You must, the Keynesians live and die by this, so learn it. Firms sell goods and services they produce to households and markets for goods and services. Then there's factor markets, of course. An economy's income distribution is the way in which total income is divided among the owners of various factors of production. It's one way of looking at it. Trace the following events through the circular flow: the introduction of a new technology that boosts productivity, the decision of consumers to save more money. Saving more money is what Austrians believe drives production. What the Keynesians believe drives production is either government or individual spending, and they believe in a multiplier and some other things, and we don't buy that. Now, positivity versus normativity. Positive economics, branch of economic analysis that describes the way the economy actually works. Normative makes prescriptions about the way economy should work, right? So one's subjective, the other's objective. Positive economics is about description. Objective, subjective, by the way. Objectively, I'm 5'9" tall. Subjective is I'm attractive, right? I'm attractive to Kelly. Don't ask me why, but I am. You may not think so. That's subjective. Positive economics is about description. Normative economics is about prescription or prescription. A forecast is a simple prediction of the future, and I would emphasize again, the future is unknowable. If you don't believe that, then there would be fortune tellers on every corner. But when we see a fortune teller and I say, what do you think of someone who can look into the future and tell you what's going to happen? You would look at me and say, that's absurd. That's a charlatan. You shouldn't believe that. But if I say to you, well, I have a model that will predict the future, And everybody goes, oh, well, a model. Well, that's science, you know, and that's a dumb thing to get caught up in. Don't buy into that. So there we go. Forecasts. We're almost to the end of this stack. And then I got one more. Label these as normative or positive. That's B positive, normative, A normative, B positive, right? Pretty simple. You can get this. It's just a matter whether they're subjective or objective. Media coverage tends to exaggerate the real differences in views among economists. Yeah, somewhat. We agree on a number of things, as you can tell already. Economics is often tied up in politics. Well, read Krugman's articles each week and his blog post at the New York Times. Powerful interest groups find and promote economists who profess supportive opinions. Keep that in mind. Diverse people have diverse values. Reasonable people can come to different conclusions because of their values. I explain it in the beginning of this class as the constrained and unconstrained vision, and I try and bring it to you from a psychological standpoint. That's one way of looking at it. And what are they but your values, you know? I believe in individualism and people pulling themselves up from their bootstraps. It comes from a number of different things that have occurred in my life. So that's the way I think. So this last bit says, two economists can legitimately disagree about which simplifications are appropriate. The one thing that I've noticed over the years is I am willing to debate anyone, anytime, anywhere. I've found that especially Mr. Krugman is unwilling to debate. I look at other economists and I measure an economic theory by its willingness to debate. So this is one of the problems I have with the people who are on the left. They simply don't seem to want to debate, and I think that's wrong. You know, many can disagree with me and say, "Oh, it's the people on the right." Here I am. I'm on the right. I'm willing to debate any subject that you want, and respectfully. So dialogue is what we need on these things. That's why I present this class the way I present it. I do not worry about presenting my viewpoint as being one-sided, because most of you come in here and it's clear by your blog posts or your posts and discussion that you've been well educated, or I would say miseducated, in the leftist kind of viewpoint. So I don't really worry about being overdoing it with my views, because I'm just catching you up on what the other half of the world thinks. So there you have it. That's chapter 2. Let's move on to chapter 3. And again, there it is. And you can download it. Now this one is good, and I'll close up today with this one. This should take me, we're about 53 minutes in, so another half hour. So I can go through this stack pretty quickly too, just because this is something you learn like a trade, like sweating pipes, supply and demand, but it's so crucial to what we do. So here we are, supply and demand from Krugman and Wells, fifth edition. What's competitive? Supply and demand curves, equilibrium quantity in the market. Now, we agree on all this. This is fantastic. What are shortages and surpluses? Why do we price movements? Why do price movements eliminate them? So a competitive market has many buyers and sellers of the same good or service. See that immediately I would say you might, and people on the right, I'm a libertarian, so I don't, I'm sort of a maverick in this area, but we're having an argument about Twitter right now, right? And if you want to talk about a principle, here's a principle: discrimination, right? In the free market, you are allowed to discriminate. You're allowed in a free country, you're allowed to discriminate. But now when I say discrimination, you think about what? You think about racism or black people or something. That's what you've been taught to think. But there's many forms of discrimination. Think of this one. Last week, Trump stepped in it somehow. He's just famous for this. He said something on Twitter, and I don't even remember what it was. Rioting causes shooting, or something stupid he said. And no surprise, I trade on that. Meaning I take advantage of things the president says. Anyway, so he said something, and he got into it with the CEO of Twitter, because they took it down, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. They took it down. Go on the discussion thing and say, Cleaver, you're wrong about this. But I'm pretty sure this is what happened. They took it down because they think that that it was over the top for some reason. It wasn't fact checked or something, or it was dangerous. That's subjective, right? I didn't find it dangerous. I thought it was kind of silly, but I think I know what he was trying to say. Watch, when the looting starts, people will be shooting each other. But nonetheless, they found it insensitive. They took it down. Now, most people agree that Twitter and its CEO lean to the left. And so you could say that Twitter is a left-leaning company. They discriminate against right-leaning ideas. I don't think anybody would argue with that. You and I might say, oh my gosh, that's a free speech issue, and we should shut down Twitter because they won't allow free speech. As a libertarian, I disagree. They're absolutely allowed to do whatever the hell they want. But the principle is this, and I'll give you the example. In Jim Crow South, if you owned a diner, you could put a sign on the door that said whites only, and you would be discriminating. What was the cost of that discrimination? In a competitive market, the cost of discrimination is the customers that you lose from that discrimination. Okay? So if Twitter discriminates against right-wingers, there's a bunch of right-wingers that aren't going to use Twitter. It is no different than putting up a whites-only sign up in your diner. In principle, okay? Now, most of us find that type of racism really freaking sick. But nonetheless, a competitive market puts a cost on your discrimination. So I would say that Twitter is a competitive market, and there will probably be something called F Twitter, a new company that puts up and says, listen, we really are into free speech, and we'll let you put up whatever you want. And that we're going to put up with Nazis, and we're going to put up with communists. We don't care. Come one, come all. And maybe they'll put Twitter out of business. I don't know. But do you understand what I'm trying to get you to understand is the principle of a competitive market, right? The principle is many buyers and sellers. Doesn't matter if there's many buyers and sellers. It's still competitive, because what happens is there will be competition, because if you discriminate, I'm going to go somewhere else, right? And we can always influence price. Even a company like Google or these antitrust laws, there's always implied competition, because somebody's going to, in my circles, in the libertarian circles, nobody uses Google. they use DuckDuckGo because they don't spy on you. So, I don't know, right? That's competition. So there are competitors to Google. Many buyers and sellers, not necessarily, but nonetheless, it's a good way of thinking about it. Supply and demand model is a model of how a competitive market behaves, right? Demand represents behavior of buyers, right? The buyers demand things. Shows the quantity demanded at various prices. The quantity demanded is the quantity that buyers are willing and able to purchase at a particular price, right? So here it is. Here it is in graphic form, and they use natural gas here. As the price rises, people demand less. How do they do that? You would think that it would be more inelastic, but it's not. People figure out how to conserve if you raise the price. This is a great argument for people that hate fossil fuels. I do not. I think they're a miracle. But if you wanted to lower the demand or somehow not burn as many fossil fuels, you just jack the price up, and people will conserve. They're incentivized to conserve as the market price goes up. So here it is going up, and here is the demand going down, right? So we always have a downward sloping demand curve as the quantity goes up and the price goes down. There we go. Pay more, pump less. Here's Krugman trying to show that, yeah, we consume so much because we're, our price is so low. I did a study on this one time, and I figured that the price of gasoline should be, without taxes and government intervention, the price of gasoline would be somewhere below $1. It'd be about 86 cents or something like that, even given inflation. So now a move along the demand curve, right, is a change in price and quantity demanded. Now we have a move in demand, overall demand. A rightward shift in demand is an increase in demand, and vice versa. I'll put this question on a test, and half of you will get it wrong. It's the difference between a movement along the demand curve and an increase in demand are two different things. Try and get this straight, right? Overall demand increased. I don't know why. Population went up. Something happened. Moving along versus a shift. And here they are. They're going to try and nail this home for you. Please remember this clearly. But again, and I don't, Murray Rothbard says this in his lecture. Some of you students will get it wrong immediately, about half of you. He's teaching at a Polytechnic University. There's supposedly some really smart people there in his classroom, and they're going to get it wrong. In an event that increases demand shifts demand rightward and vice versa, right? What happened to the demand for natural gas? Well, maybe solar got really cheap. That would be good. Now, substitutes. Two goods are substitutes if a decrease in the price of one leads to a decrease in the demand for other. Right? What happens to demand for travel in Hawaii if airfares for travel in the Caribbean increase? Right? This is, we can see that they're substitutes for each other. It's steak and hot dogs, right? Price of steak goes up high enough, demand for hot dogs will increase. Two goods are complements. If they decrease in the price of one leads to an increase in the demand for the other. Hot dogs and mustard. Consumers often have to buy such goods together. Increase in the price of gas will decrease the demand for SUVs. Right? That's the other one. Want more fuel-efficient cars? Well, make gas more expensive. You'll get more fuel-efficient cars out there. 1973 was the greatest example of that during the oil embargo. You can look up that history. Normal goods, demand increases when income increases. Inferior goods, demand decreases when income increases, right? Hot dog demand decreases when income increases. Demand for steaks are normal. Demand increases when income increases, of course. Taste and preferences are subjective, vary amongst consumers. Seasonal changes are fads, right? I mean, why is a Louis Vuitton bag more expensive by some exponent than any other? I don't know. It seems like a fad to me. What happens to demand for boots in October? They get more expensive. Taste and preferences and seasonal things. Expectations. This is so important to what's going on today. If consumers have a choice about the timing of a purchase, this is the time preference, what we call, they buy according to expectations. If you think the price of gasoline is going to $4, you might buy a smaller car. Buyers adjust current spending in anticipation of the direction of future prices, right? Here's the Xbox example. That's a good one. Petroleum goes up. There it is. Increase. Right? Pretty simple. Population. This is demographics. Number of buyers are particularly good. What happens to demand for diapers as birth rates drop? They go down. Here's another practice question. You can do these on your own. 50%, right? If you think that OPEC was the first oil cartel, you're wrong. There was one in the United States before that. Read your history. Individual demand curves and the market demand curve, right? We just add them all up. It's a horizontal sum of individual demand curves makes for the market demand curve. Again, you're trying to make math out of what is not math, but yeah, you can do it. It makes some sense sometimes. How are we doing? Oh, we're doing great. Supply represents the behavior of sellers. We have an upward sloping supply curve. So that means that the more quantity, the more higher the prices, the more suppliers are willing to supply, right? If you raise the price of natural gas to $4, a whole bunch of entrepreneurs are going to go out there looking for natural gas, and they're going to find it. And they keep finding it. It's crazy. Well, anyway, there's the supply of natural gas in a schedule, and here it is graphically. Right? Here we have a supply increase. You could have this one every time we seem to be at what we call peak oil or peak gas. There's bigger discoveries and easier discoveries and things like that. So that idea has been killed all the time. So again, don't get this wrong, a movement along the supply curve versus a shift. And I'll go through these quickly because it's just the opposite. You try to think of, why would supply shifters happen? What would happen? Input prices, related goods and services, technology, expectations, number of producers, right? When the price of oil goes way up, a whole bunch of producers jump in. Shifts of the supply curve, increase in supply, decrease. Here's how it looks. We're going to see them all together. A decrease in the price of an input, all else equal. Remember this assumption. Increases profits, total revenue. We call it total revenue, and you're going to hear Murray talk about this. He's more interested in TR. If you're a business student, I think it's a much better approach to focus on total revenue than it is to look at things different, the way that the Keynesians do. What will happen to the number of new businesses if the government reduces the fees and red tape associated with new business licenses? Right? You get more businesses. I'm pretty sure that the next round of bailouts is going to be in the form of a payroll tax holiday, if you will. We had one back in 2008 when, as Bush was leaving office for Obama, they did a tax holiday. Well, when you your employer pays half the payroll taxes, which essentially is a pass-through tax. You end up paying it through lower. You want to raise wages, quit taxing businesses. That's one way. But anyway, I think that they'll do that, and it's sort of a government reduction in fees, and that will cause employment to rise. So they're going to have to come up with some scheme to get employment up there again, and I'm sure that's what they'll try. I'm pretty sure. We'll see. Inputs used in production have opportunity costs. Sellers will choose to use inputs whose profit is the highest, of course. Sellers will supply less of a good if its profitability falls, and vice versa. There are substitutes and complements in production processes, right? You can think of this. If at the end of your academic career here at CMC, if you're a CMC student, we do a simulation in the business school for a capstone course. I got to do it. It's fun. But you do a sneaker company. Well, if you are building sneakers, you would think, how would I substitute? And you say, well, you could use, instead of leather, you could use pleather or whatever the hell it is. Yeah. Leather can get very expensive. You can use different laces. You can use cheaper rubber. You can do all sorts of things. Complement in pork processing is lard. Nobody knows what lard is anymore, but that's the fat from pork. Substitute in corn production is cotton. If there's way too much corn out there, I'm a farmer, so I know this. You look for a different crop. You say, oh, I'm not gonna produce corn because the price is going down, so I'll produce cotton. It depends on your climate and soil and everything else, but nonetheless, new, better technology makes sellers willing to offer more at a given price, right? Prices should go down. Remember where you heard this. Prices are only going up because of printing money and inflating the currency. The price of goods should go down over time. Because of this, technology innovation lowers costs and increases supply. So naturally, prices should go down. This idea that deflation is a thing and it's bad, that's not necessarily true. When the price of iPhones should go down over time, everybody knows that. The expectation of a higher price for good in the future decreases current supply if they can store the good, and vice versa. This is behind a lot of government schemes. We'll store a bunch of corn to affect the price. Sellers adjust their current offerings in anticipation of direction of future prices. This is happening in the car business right now. Some car dealers are hoarding cars so that they have something to sell later on. It's interesting. Producers enter and exit the market. The overall supply changes, right? When drillers leave, entry implies more sellers in the market, increasing supply. That means drillers for oil. Exit implies fewer sellers, decreasing supply. As more firms enter the solar installation market, the number of installations available for sale increases, and of course, the price goes down, which is marvelous. I'd like solar to be affordable. Solar doesn't pay itself off without government money. Without some kind of subsidy. solar sucks. It takes like 30 years to pay it off. So when you drive around, you see people with these solar panels on their roof. The only reason they're there is because the government provides a subsidy. So hopefully those subsidies always end because every 4 years we get different government. But the same thing with a company like Tesla. It's just it's built on a regulatory arbitrage, as I call it. But they most of their income came from trading in environmental subsidies. So that'll be over soon. I think Tesla, the car, will survive because it's a cool car and everybody likes to go fast, and they go fast. But nonetheless, it's not going to replace the entire car business. That's silly. Individual supply curve in the market. Remember this? Add them all up, right? 2 and 1 is 3, right? And 2 that stays at $2. We're just aggregating. So when quantity supplied equals quantity demand, this is the whole point of this lecture. This is the amount consumers will purchase at the price matched exactly, but the amount producers wish to sell. Price discovery is what we talk about, and this is where the free market people like myself say this is what government can't do. They can't figure out pricing. Marx thought that what they would do after the revolution was that we would leave like Switzerland to have a free market system so that you could figure out where to price goods. That seems silly to me, but that was sort of his model. The price at which this takes place is the equilibrium price, also referred to as the market clearing price. The quantity of good or service bought and sold is the equilibrium quantity. So you can see where these meet at $3 and 10. This is natural gas, and this is trillions of BTUs. BTUs are British thermal units. That's the way that gas is measured. Why do all sales and purchases in a market take place at the same price? They don't. Where consumers don't have time to compare prices, like a tourist trap, different stores have different prices. In well-established markets, there's somewhat of a uniform price. In the long run, there never is. Why does the market price fall if it is above equilibrium? Then there's a surplus of the good when the quantity supplied exceeds the quantity demanded. Well, we're going to get into this when we start talking about meddling in markets. This is I love to use the housing market in the Valley as an example because it works so well. And everyone here, if you're paying rent, you know that you're paying a ton of money. So, I'm going to show you why. The surplus of good when the quantity supplied exceeds what's demanded. Surpluses don't last. Sellers reduce price so they can move goods off the shelves, right? Here's the surplus. You can measure it, realistically. So it'll push that price down until it hits the $3 equilibrium. There's a shortage when the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied, right? Shortages don't last. Sellers will increase price to increase total revenue, right? Surplus will push the price down until it reaches $3. This is all pretty simple, but it's a law. So what happens when we get an increase in demand? Well, the price will obviously rise until suppliers react, and suppliers will react, and they'll increase And the same thing with a supply curve shift. What will happen to demand? Well, you just figure out where your new equilibrium is going to be. Okay. Garden gnomes, my favorite thing. They're both going to rise in that situation. Cost of wood falls. What will happen to violins? Well, price falls and quantity rises. You know, these are great test questions. And here's simultaneous shifts. Is illustrated here, right? You can get an idea of what might happen. This law of supply and demand, you know, again, it's been tried and true for many years. It's the closest thing we have to truth, and so this is where this is the basis, and that's why I bring it up. It's great to teach out of a Keynesian book because we agree on this. So when we start screwing around with markets, you're going to be able to see what happens. And so anyway, that's the end of this this chapter. I'll put up chapter 4 and 5 maybe later on in the week, and we'll start to get into meddling in markets. You have chapters 3 and 4 for homework this week. Make sure you do those and read, you know, read along in the book. Answer the discussion by what do we say? Friday midnight, right? And then Tuesday at midnight it'll close. Looks like everybody did a great job. You know, again, I'm going to start grading them. I just started. But I love reading everybody's reactions to a question. I'll be really interested in what you think about policing. So anyway, keep up with the news and keep up with the reading in the book, and make sure you listen to these lectures so that you can really nail this stuff down and start to think about why we study economics and why we apply these principles to policy problems and decisions that governments make, for better or for worse. So anyway, that's all I've got for today. God bless you all, and we will talk soon. I'm gonna